My name is Jeanette Gare. I'm the Director of Environment Georgia. And we are so excited to hang with our fellow Southeasterners this afternoon and take a little less than an hour now to talk about clean energy in our great states and hope that by the end of this hour, you leave inspired by the progress we've made, fired up to double down on this progress. And last but not least, I am hoping to get some of our competitive juices flowing because there is so much more work to do in all of our states. So I'm coming for you, Virginia. As a former Virginian, I feel like I could say that. Okay, I'm going to run through our agenda. So if you want to move on to the next slide really briefly, and then we can dive right in. So first, the reason this webinar is happening today is because a few weeks ago, our national network partner, Environment America, launched the 8th iteration of our Renewables on the Rise dashboard, which is an amazing tool that can help us look at our progress, compare and contrast our work in other states. And we'll give a quick overview of the dashboard, get a sense of how the Southeast compares to other regions from one of our dashboard authors, and then we'll dive in. So our network actually has organizations on the ground working on these issues day in, day out in 4 of the Southeastern states. And we've each chosen basically a metric that's tracked in the dashboard to dive into. And we've got some special guests that will help to flesh out some of those conversations. And then we have maybe just a little tiny bit of time for questions. We'll see how this goes on a slightly revised timeline. But what I do recommend is folks use the Q&A function to ask questions as we move along, and we'll work on giving answers as we go. All right. Let me introduce, it's my pleasure and an honor to introduce Tony Dutzik, who is the Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst with another network partner, the Frontier Group. As I mentioned, he is one of the authors of our dashboard. Tony started his career as a journalist and hails from the great state of Massachusetts, which we will not hold against him this morning. Tony, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks,
and I'll put the dashboard in the chat as well.
Okay. Thanks, Jeanette, and thanks to all of you for your patience in hanging in on the webinar and for being here to celebrate the rise of renewable energy in the Southeast. As Jeanette mentioned, my name is Tony Dutzik. I'm Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst at Frontier Group. We're a research and public policy organization whose mission is to provide information and ideas to build a healthier, more sustainable America. And renewable energy and clean energy technologies are a key part of achieving that vision. Helping to clear our air, reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and limit our impact on the climate. Next slide. So the Renewables on the Rise dashboard is our 8th annual review of the progress of renewable energy and clean energy technologies at the state level around the country. It covers 6 indicators of clean energy progress: wind and solar power generation, the number of battery electric vehicles on the road and number of EV charging ports, battery energy storage capacity, and savings from utility energy efficiency programs. The online dashboard enables you to do a deep dive into clean energy trends in your state and compare them with states across the region and around the country. I would encourage you after the webinar is over to check it out and also to have fun looking at the trends and comparing them state to state. Next slide. When we started producing this report in 2014, there was not a lot of good news on clean energy coming out of the Southeast. This animation that we show for the growth of solar, wind, and geothermal power in the region is going to show a little bit of that trajectory. And the good news is that that trajectory has really begun to change in the last several years, with numerous states throughout the region seeing increased and accelerated growth, particularly in solar energy, with Florida now leading the way, North Carolina an early leader, and other states joining in. Next slide. You might have to click it twice. Let's click one more time. And so in several categories of clean energy progress, southeastern states are now becoming genuine leaders. North Carolina ranks 4th in the nation for power generation from solar energy, and Florida, which had long lagged behind in adoption of solar energy despite its name as the Sunshine State, now ranks 3rd. Florida trails only California for the total number of full battery electric vehicles on the road, and ranks 4th for installed utility scale battery storage capacity. And even states that are not yet leaders have begun to show progress. So in our most recent dashboard, we found that Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Virginia rank 1st through 4th nationally in the percentage increase in solar power production since 2014. Now, many of those states are starting off from a low base, but as you saw in that horse race graphic, they're beginning to show the kinds of signs of progress that we've seen taken hold in other southeastern states in the last decade and increasingly around the country. Next slide. But as we'll discuss, there is still lots of work to do. The southeastern states tend to rank low in savings from utility energy efficiency programs. And this is particularly important given the expected growth in electricity demand throughout the region from things like data centers, manufacturing facilities, and other sources. Curbing energy waste and improving efficiency is often the cleanest, fastest, cheapest way to meet our energy needs, and southeastern states still have quite a long way to go. And as a share of total electricity production, no state in the Southeast currently generates more than 10% of its power from wind, solar, and geothermal sources. And that's a far cry from the national average of about 18% and miles away from some of the leading states. But the good news, though, is that renewable energy and clean energy technologies are becoming common throughout the Southeast, resulting in cleaner air, less dependence on fossil fuels, and less impact on the climate. And with renewed commitment and smart public policy, the past decade's growth in clean energy can be just the beginning. So thanks very much again for coming out, and I will turn it back over to Jeanette.
And I will turn around and turn it right back to Ellie.
Oh, I went past a little fast. I was trying to unmute myself. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ellie Baber-Wilson. I am the State Director for Environment Virginia, and I love that I have the sun behind me today in my background, and Virginia could not be sunnier out today as well, which is exciting, so I can talk a little bit about the growth in solar in Virginia. But first, I'm going to give you a bigger snapshot of where we are with renewables on the rise coming out of the dashboard. So as Tony mentioned, we are 4th in percent increase in solar. We're 9th in the nation for generation. So I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit later. So I'll kind of skip over a bit of this right now. 22nd in battery storage capacity. And I think that's pretty awesome considering we had 0 capacity pre-2022. So we are growing. 22nd isn't exactly the ranking we want, but if we're starting from scratch, it's actually not terrible. We are 4th in EV registrations in 2023. And we've passed a lot of policy to get us there. We have accelerated this growth by adopting clean car standards, investing in charging infrastructure, and taking advantage of federal EV rebates. Now, our clean car standards are currently being challenged in court, and Virginia has its own EV rebate program that is still unfunded. So there's still some work to do, and we hope to be able to defend our clean car standards so that we can indeed continue to see those EV registrations increase and have Virginians have the ability to buy electric vehicles. And then another exciting highlight from the dashboard is that Virginia is 3rd in percent increase in incremental lifetime energy savings. The cleanest energy is the stuff that we don't use. And so that is definitely a highlight in what in this whole report. And it all kind of comes down to something that happened. Oh, I was trying to change the slide at the same time. Happened in Virginia. And so you kind of see in this chart, you might think, there's a year in there that something must have happened. So I'm going to dive into solar energy, but a lot of the trends actually with wind and EVs and battery storage, they all kind of started shifting around the same time. So A cool stat from the report is that Virginia generated more solar energy last year alone than it did before 2021 combined. That's incredible. And so we are on the right path. And I circled down there where something started happening. So in 2020, we saw a tremendous growth in solar. And you would notice this with our other indicators as well. But again, I'm focusing on solar. So what happened there? We committed to switching to 100% renewable energy. So a picture of me there during our celebration of our commitment to 100% renewable energy in 2020. This past, just as the world was sort of shutting down, this is me on my back porch. We kind of had virtual parties everywhere about it. But we codified our commitment to 100% clean energy by mid-century. And that's through passing the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We also passed a bill called Solar Freedom that year. So with those things combined, we were able to not only see a large jump in utility solar, but also a big increase in rooftop solar in our neighborhoods and on our schools and places like that. So the Virginia Clean Economy Act mandated that investor-owned utilities have to hit certain benchmarks in solar and wind generation. And then Solar Freedom really worked on making sure that we had more shared solar programs where, as a renter, or if you just have a lot of trees and you want solar energy, you're able to buy into these programs where lower or smaller scale solar is built and you're able to get your power from that place, even though you might not be able to have panels on your own home. So the solar impacts were pretty immediate with these two bills. The wind is going to take a little bit longer, but we have made tremendous progress on getting the largest offshore wind in federal waters going underway off the coast of Virginia. So we'll see a little bit more with that, but as I said, the solar impacts were pretty immediate. And then in 2024, we kind of followed up on some of these things. We did a pretty big increase in shared solar capacity. So again, if you can't have it on your own roof, it's really nice to be able to buy into a program. And the shared solar and rooftop solar was actually growing at a faster rate than utility scale. We need both in Virginia. We're not going to get there with all utility, and we're not going to get there probably with all rooftop. So that combination and having smart policies has shown that, you know, you can go from a state with no solar to climbing really quickly in the rankings in just a couple of years with strong policy and a plan. Now, where do we go from here? We need to double down. We need to accelerate this adoption of solar, particularly on our rooftops. I think we'll hear a little bit more about resiliency later in this, but I do know that I've been thinking a lot more about what we can be doing with battery capacity and solar on our homes to weather like storms and, you know, power outages. My power just went out yesterday and I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if I had solar and battery to keep the lights on here and the internet going. So we need to accelerate the adoption of solar. We can do this, and we are doing this in a few different ways. There are great federal tax credits for putting solar panels on your roof right now. We in Virginia have an allotment of the Solar for All funding, which is federal funding. And there's a couple really cool programs that they are looking at for this. One of which, as a renter, I'm really excited about is getting more solar on rentals. So that is still in the decision-making process in terms of what exactly all that funding is going to be used for, but it's going to bring a lot more funding for solar in Virginia to communities that might not be just building it on their own. We need to improve permitting for simple projects. Most solar projects in your neighborhood are really cookie cutter and can actually be done automatically through, you know, just software. In Fredericksburg, it takes up to 21 days to get a solar permit for on top of your roof. We have the potential to make that 0 days. So actually mandating automated solar permitting would be a great solution. And some localities in Virginia have started with that really across the state and a lot of the more rural counties. So I'd like to see that across the state so that that can be easier. And then we need to ensure that development in Virginia is actually in line with our 100% commitment. Tony mentioned earlier, this whole region has a data centers and load growth potential. Virginia is the data center capital of the world, so we really know about the risks of what the demand that they are having on our commitment to 100% renewable energy. And we need to look at, before we're developing more of these data centers, are they in line with our 100% commitment? We cannot be building more gas plants to fund or to power these things and put, our health and our goals at risk. And then again, we just need to double down on the small scale and community solar stuff. Dominion has a $55 minimum shared solar bill. So to join that program, that is the highest in the nation. So if we want more people to be joining their small scale and community solar programs, we need to make it so that it's competitive with the rest of the country. We should not have that is not the ranking we want #1 in. So that is the quick snapshot of what's going on in Virginia. And I hope to even have more updates and higher rankings next year when we release this.
Thanks, Ellie. And I will go ahead and take it from here. All right. So, hey, everyone. I am Emily Mason, and I'm the advocate with Environment North Carolina. North Carolina is doing really well in clean energy growth, falling into second place in our region behind Florida in the race toward a renewable energy future. So replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources will help reduce the pollution that fuels extreme weather events like Hurricane Helene. And energy storage can provide a backup power source during future storms. So it's imperative that we move forward with more wind energy to provide clean, reliable electricity to the homes of North Carolinians. Today, we're going to focus on the rise of wind energy in North Carolina. We're leading in the region when it comes to clean, renewable wind power. But first, I'm going to give a quick overview of where we stand as a state on other clean energy technologies. So North Carolina continues to shine with solar as utility scale solar continues to rise and solar panels go up on rooftops. We're 4th in the nation in solar generation with enough solar generated to power over 1 million homes for a year. We're 15th in the nation in battery storage capacity, which is great in comparison to our 0% capacity before 2019. 15th nationally for EV registrations and 12th for building out charging ports. North Carolina saved enough energy in 2022 to power over 700,000 US households for a year, coming in 11th for total expected energy savings from efficiency measures implemented in 2022. Next slide, please. Here's where North Carolina is currently on wind energy generation. Wind energy generation in North Carolina ranks 30th in the nation, but we are currently ahead of our neighbors in Virginia, Georgia, and Florida. We expect this graph to continue to go up as current projects work towards completion in the state. And next slide, please. In 2007, North Carolina became the first Southeast state to adopt a renewable energy and energy efficiency portfolio standard, which requires investor-owned utilities to meet up to 12.5% of their energy through renewable sources or energy efficiency projects. In 2017, Amazon Wind came online, which was a milestone project since it was the first utility-scale wind farm in our state. Amazon Wind powers Amazon Web Services data centers, and it consists of 104 turbines. Since about 2018, wind energy has continued to be in development, but due to restrictive state policies and an offshore wind leasing moratorium during the first Trump administration, development has been slow. So the biggest barriers for wind energy growth in North Carolina for the past several years have been market uncertainty and efforts to introduce antagonistic policies at the state and federal level, as well as misinformation. So currently, some projects are in early stages of development, but many are still several years away from operation. Next slide, please. So here are the current projects to look at going forward. Amazon Wind is currently operating. Looking forward, our next land-based wind project is Timbermill Wind, which is expected to be completed before the end of the year. Looking towards the future for land-based wind, Duke has proposed 1,200 megawatts of land-based wind across the Carolinas. So that's not just North, but also South Carolina by 2033. And as for the future of offshore wind, Duke Energy has proposed 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind in North Carolina by 2035. So driving the future of wind energy generation is a combination of the carbon reduction mandate through House Bill 951 and demand for more clean energy sources across the state. All right, next slide. All right, so great. Now I'd like to welcome Carly Lohan. She is the Carolinas Program Manager at Southeastern Wind Coalition. And Carly can give us some more background on the overview of wind energy in North Carolina. Welcome, Carly.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. And thank you for having me here today. As Emily mentioned, my name is Carly Lohan. I am the Carolinas Program Manager at the Southeastern Wind Coalition. And if you're not familiar with SEWC, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So we're based, our mission focuses around education and outreach. And we work to make sure that we can advance both offshore and land-based wind energy across the Southeast. So while I cover our work in North and South Carolina, we do have an 11-state footprint. And Ellie, if you'll go to the next slide. In order to give you a little bit more context as to where we are in the Southeast and more specifically North Carolina, we do kind of have to start large and work our way in. So this first map on the top left, that shows that like dark blue swath through the middle of the country, that shows where the really great wind is. And if you look below, those little white dots represent all of the existing land-based wind projects as of 2023. As you can see, the wind generation profile looks a little bit different in the Southeast than it does in the rest of the country. And therefore, we don't have as many projects as we do in the rest of the country for land-based wind. And kind of the same goes for offshore. This map from NREL doesn't show wind speeds for offshore, but if you look at the two images on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see, and again, I really just put this here for context, you'll see the great concentration of offshore wind projects that are in various stages of leasing and permitting and construction in the Northeast. And then we've got one in North Carolina at the top of the state, Kitty Hawk Wind, and then two other lease areas at the very bottom of the state, Carolina Long Bay. So all that is to say, North Carolina is a leader in land-based wind in the Southeast because we have that first project, Amazon Wind, that came online in 2017, and Timbermill Wind is located right next door, and that'll come online next month. We're really excited to see Duke Energy move forward with advancing additional land-based wind projects across the state. And we have offshore wind projects that have been leased by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they're in those early stages of environmental surveying and site assessment surveying, but they have not yet secured offtake. So that's kind of the important distinction to remember with offshore wind in North Carolina. I'm not going to go into all of the nitty-gritty details about North Carolina's electricity market structure and how all that works, but I do think it's important to talk about the fact that there are impacts from the local to the federal level on wind energy development. At the federal level for offshore wind, that very much looks like leasing through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and how quickly those permits can get through the pipeline. It also has a lot to do with offshore wind tax credits that are available for offshore wind projects, like the Inflation Reduction Act. When you're talking about projects that cost billions of dollars, a 50% tax credit helps a lot. But those tax credits can also apply for land-based wind and other manufacturing investments that we're starting to see in North Carolina as well. At the state level, again, permitting happens for offshore wind related to the interconnection of those projects, and then also for other offshore projects, and then also environmental permitting and local ordinances through state and local agencies. So all of this is to say it is important to have that baseline of durable bipartisan support for both offshore and land-based wind to make it happen. And while that has ebbed and flowed a little bit over time, we've seen really, really great things coming out of the northeastern part of the state where we have those land-based wind projects. And we're very fortunate to have a leader like Virginia, who is currently developing the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, to look forward to and see all the amazing things that are happening there. So, Emily, I can pause there and see if there's any questions that you wanted to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of interested in like a comparison between North Carolina, like our potential for wind energy versus other states' potential, and just sort of like building out that picture of like what's possible in our state versus other states.
Absolutely. So if you look at a map of the wind energy, the offshore wind energy potential, usually the wind speeds aren't quite as high offshore of North Carolina as they are in the northeastern part of the state, but we do have very shallow water, which is very convenient for construction and operation. We've got a very, very long coastline, and we've overall got a very steady and predictable wind resource. And the same stands true for land-based wind. Even though the speeds aren't as high, there's so many technology advancements, and cost trends have really been favorable on the land-based wind side of things. So again, even though the speeds aren't quite that high, there are still ways to optimize the technology. When it comes to North Carolina compared to other states, we have a little bit of a different regulatory regime. And I would say really the biggest difference between a place like North Carolina and a place like Virginia is that we've really seen Virginia move full steam ahead. There is unwavering support from the state level, from the utility Dominion Energy, and that's really made all the difference because it's been able to send those positive signals to the market that yes, we want wind, and yes, we're open for business, and yes, we're willing to make those investments. So that's what we want to see more of in North Carolina. And again, it's really great to be able to model ourselves after Virginia and all the great work going on there. And again, I think it's important to remember that the reason that certainty is so important is because both onshore and offshore wind are very long lead time projects. So developers, manufacturers, OEMs, whatever it might be, they need to know that these projects kind of have a life cycle in North Carolina early so that they can make those commitments for the long term. And when we're talking about long term, we're talking about the state's not only interim carbon reduction goal, but their net zero carbon reduction goal by 2050. So it's a very long lead time, big investments today for clean energy down the road.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carly. I really appreciate you being here today. And let's see, I will go ahead. And I guess if we're done with North Carolina, I will go ahead and head down to Georgia.
Thanks, North Carolina. Welcome to Georgia, everybody. So I'm not going to read all of this, but we'll highlight a couple things. So solar, similar to North Carolina, similar to Virginia, we've seen big increases, 3,616%, not too shabby. I'll also highlight we continue to be a leader in electric vehicle registrations. Georgia came out of the gates early on this with a state tax credit that some folks on the call might remember. That tax credit was eliminated in 2016, but Peach State drivers have continued to buy EVs, which is good since we're manufacturing a lot of them. I'll share, when we kind of send out some things to share with folks, I'll share an article that I think does a great job of touching on a lot of this data. But I want to dive next into energy efficiency. So next slide. Why energy efficiency? Why is it so important? Well, I'd argue that making sure that we are not systematically wasting energy is maybe the most important metric. And investing in energy efficiency is almost always the cheapest way to essentially generate a new megawatt. So what our dashboard does is it compares or captures utility energy efficiency programs. Each year, a utility will implement a suite of programs, think weatherization programs that help make homes more energy efficient. And then they'll report in a year the estimated lifetime savings of those programs. So in a minute, I'll actually show some of the graphs from our dashboard. You'll see that we measure energy efficiency in gigawatt hours. To put that into context, in 2022, Georgia reported energy savings of a little over 6,000 gigawatt hours, and those gigawatt hours could essentially power over 500,000 homes. All right, next slide. So how does Georgia stack up? Well, with a few exceptions, we've shown relatively solid year-over-year progress in energy efficiency. So continuous programs being implemented and delivering savings. Next slide. And we're doing better than Florida. Sorry, Mia, who ranks 23rd. Next slide. Virginia is actually interesting, as Ellie highlighted. If you look at the change between 2013 and 2022, they actually rank higher than Georgia. But in the context here, you can see that they started behind and are still a little bit behind. Next slide. North Carolina for the win again. Their delta is actually not as high as Georgia's, but they have been delivering solid year after year improvements on energy efficiency since even before 2013. Next slide. And I thought it'd be helpful to put that all in into some context and added Illinois here at the very end. They are one of the national leaders for energy efficiency improvements, just making the case that we have a lot of work to do in this space, which is why, next slide, I am so excited to introduce Chris Anderson. He's a program manager with GIFA. And very importantly, he has been leading the charge on designing and as of today, partially implementing a massive home energy rebate program. So Chris, welcome. What is this program? What should Georgians know? Why don't we, maybe let's stop sharing the slides for just a moment and maybe we can bring Chris up as well.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me, Jeanette. So today's a big day for us. It's actually the start of our pilot launch of the DOE, or Department of Energy, IRA-funded home energy rebate program. So we have, as of today, we're in what we're calling a pilot launch for the two home efficiency programs. Really think of it more as like a restaurant soft launch, so to speak. And we'll talk more about kind of how that's going to work. But Jeanette, if you have the slides, I would love to go over kind of the basics of how the two programs function. So back, you probably remember, back under the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed 2 years ago, there was a program that was included called the Home Energy Rebates, and it's actually two separate programs, and in total, it makes up about $8.8 billion nationwide for home energy efficiency and electrification programs. Georgia's allocation for those two programs is about 220 million, split about equally between the two programs. One program is called the Home Efficiency Rebates, and the other is the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebates. So HER and HERE, as we call them. And both of those programs launched today in the pilot phase, although not quite in their full form yet. It's going to take us about 3 to 4 months to get them fully ramped up and up to speed. But both programs are part of our pilot launch today. So we're super excited about that. There should be an announcement coming from our office really any moment, and as well as an announcement from DOE coming this afternoon as well to make it official. So I can dive just a little bit deeper into each of them just to give a sense of what is covered under the two programs. So if you go to the next slide, I think. Well, actually, first off, I guess I'll hit on this timeline quick. So back over the winter, we started planning for the rebates. We brought on a program implementer to help us think through it and help us apply. We applied for the rebates back in the spring, spent the summer working through much finer details of program structure and design with the goal of having our pilot launch this fall, which is today. And then our full program launch over the winter, as we're calling early 2025. We anticipate full program launch to happen prior to the end of Q1 2025. So that's kind of the timeline of where we're at. It's been a lot of hard work over the past year with a lot of people to get this up and running. If we go to the next slide, I think it has, our program goals. So we went in, just to speak a little bit about planning, we went in thinking about what our high level goals are. And, really we came up with these 5 things, which is reducing the energy burden of homeowners and renters in Georgia, quality and comfort of Georgia homes, having statewide accessibility, so it's accessible across the entire state, and then also customer and contractor satisfaction, because it can't work without especially contractor satisfaction, and customer satisfaction really flows out of that, we think. And then also to build and sustain a contractor workforce, and we really are going to be investing a significant amount of money in training contractors as part of this. So we're excited about that. The next slide, I think, has the details on the two programs and kind of how they're structured. So digging into HER and here for just a minute, HER is really the whole home efficiency program, and that program looks at the home holistically. So in order to get a rebate under HER, a home would have to save 20% or more of its energy, and we determine that through a modeled structure, a BPI 2400 approved energy audit. And when we look at HER, those rebates, if we can go back, sorry, one previous slide, you can see what the rebate levels are for achieving the whole home efficiency. And it's structured so that lower income residents below 80% AMI get a bigger rebate than higher income participants. So HER is open to any income level, but if you're below 80% AMI, you get a much more significant rebate. And that rebate can range up to $16,000 for a single family home. And also multifamily is included. And so this one is eligible to, or eligible for any fuel type. It's not a fuel switching program. So whether you're electric or gas or propane or what have you, you can participate in HER. Just real briefly on here, because I know we want to get into some questions. The HERE program is what you may have heard referred to as the electrification program or the point of sale rebate program. And under here, it's designed specifically for electrification, so switching fuel types. And then also it has a point of sale at retail element. Our point of sale retail element is not going to launch until over the winter. We're still working on that with the big retailers and other retailers. But under here, there's also a contractor pathway for contractors to do upgrades such as heat pump installs, heat pump water heaters, electric panel upgrades, electric wiring upgrades that are part of those heat pump retrofits as well. So both, we're really excited to get both of the programs up and running today. The programs are going to be largely delivered through an approved contractor network, which is not unlike a typical utility program. We will have a relatively small network of approved contractors to start today, but that's going to grow as we move forward with the goal of really getting anywhere from 80 to 90 contractors statewide once we're fully up to speed. So that's going to take some time to keep building out contractor engagement. But contractors are really going to be the pathway that a resident is going to come to these programs and participate in them. So we're excited to work with a lot of contractors around the state to get them enrolled in the program, get them trained, and trained on our system for how we're going to do all of the application approval, the income verification, et cetera, that has to be part of these two programs. So yeah, with that, that's kind of where we're at on this program today, briefly, and happy to dig into the questions. I know you've got a few, Jeanette, and then
I do,
others.
and I actually, Chris, I'm going to limit myself to one,
Okay.
since we are short on time. My question is, we have had a change in administration since this, program was initially designed, envisioned, whatever. And this actually came up in the questions as well. I'm curious to know, do you think anything will change? Are you guys anticipating, having to pivot or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So our application, or both our applications and our planning blueprints that we had to submit to DOE have all been approved. So as of the end of September, our application, our award has been awarded by U.S. Department of Energy. So that being said, we're moving at full speed ahead. We are not anticipating any changes in how we're operating with the program. Of course, we don't know exactly, what Congress may or may not do down the road. That's always an issue with any program funded by Congress. But we feel pretty good that we're going to be able to keep moving this forward like we have been. The award is in place, and I think that maybe has us a little more well positioned than perhaps some other programs that were included in BIL and IRA that maybe haven't been awarded yet. So from our perspective, we're moving forward.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us on this really big day for you and GFA. We really, really appreciate it. And that's all for Georgia. Handing it over to Mia. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Sunshine State, where what we lack in energy policy, we make up for in public engagement, right? Let's take a look at some of the slides that show where Florida stands stacked up across the nation and the Southeast. Hey, listen, we are a leader in some of these energy sectors across the Southeast and across the nation as well. You can see right there, we are third in solar growth, and we're behind only Texas and California in that right now. And in 2023, we generated enough solar energy to power 1.6 million homes for the year. And most of that growth is in the residential sector. So people in Florida are feeling empowered by getting their power from their own rooftop. It's grown by over 1,000% in the last 5 years, rooftop solar has. And right now, we're actually only tapping about 2% of the potential. So there's really room to grow there. We're fourth in battery storage capability. We did shrink a little bit last year from, the year before in our battery storage capability. But I will say in session earlier this year, I do know that several of our large utilities are working on large battery storage operations that they're putting in place. This is the part that I'm going to be focusing on for most of this next few minutes here. I will try to wrap it up on time. We are second in EV registrations. So Florida has shown a steady year-over-year growth in EV registrations, and we'll take a deeper dive into that in a minute. And we're third in charging ports. Makes sense. Those things go hand in hand. You got to charge those EVs. So we've added nearly 2,000 from 2022 to 2023. So let's keep moving. Before I dig into those numbers, listen, I want to share some really cool stories about renewable energy and storm resiliency that have come out of this hurricane season. We've been collecting these stories from people. They just keep flowing in. And now these may not be Florida-specific stories, but there are stories like this across the Southeast of people who were affected mostly by Hurricane Helene. We have James Uphill in Georgia I'm not going to say that name, but he's in Georgia. He has a solar panel and a Tesla battery backup system. And he said the first big gust of wind knocked out his power, but he switched over to the Powerwall and it was seamless. And he never lost power. And he certainly didn't miss the noise that his generator used to make when he pulled it out. Similar situation with Lucius is his picture with his solar panels on his roof. And he said, during Helene, when our power grid went out, and it did at least 5 times in 2 days, they were never without power. So really good stories of how diversifying our energy can really help us through a storm. There's one last one on the next slide, and this is a great one about an EV owner. Allison owns a Rivian. She had bought it 18 months ago. She hadn't even thought about it for this situation of what she could do with it for a storm. In fact, believe it or not, she lost power for 2 days before she even remembered that she had a battery sitting in her garage. So she says for the next 10 days, she was able to power her TV, her fridge, multiple devices for her children through the car. And also she was able to work from her car. She works for a global company, and so she works online a lot, and the car is a hotspot. She was without internet for 3.5 weeks and was able to work from her car in that situation. But most importantly, her family and all their pets, they could stay put. They didn't have to find a place to go. And she said at the end of 10 days, she still had 41% of the battery left in her car. So she was able to drive wherever she needed to go. Anyway, just a few stories there to inspire you about storm resiliency and renewable energy. Let's dig a little deeper here into electric vehicles in Florida. Right? We have about a little over 230,000 of them registered here in the state. More than 7% of our new car sales were electric in 2023. We're second only to California. And you can see we are way, way ahead of the other states in the region in electric vehicles right now. And then moving on to charging ports next, we are actually third. So we added 2,000 last year, and we have just under 10,000 charging ports statewide. I drive an EV. And this summer, I actually did a plastic pollution patrol around the state of Florida. So I went from Pensacola way over on the West Coast, over to Jacksonville Beach, down to Miami, and back to Tampa. And I can tell you that I never had a problem finding a charging port. I never felt that I was more than maybe 45 minutes away from a charging port. So it's great that we are continuing to add these charging ports. We'll talk more about that later. Let's move on to our next slide. Let me introduce our guest to talk a little bit more about electric vehicles. He is with the Electric Vehicle Association, Javier Guerrero, and also the president of the Tampa Bay EV Club. And Javier, if you'll come off mute for a minute and tell us a little bit about the club and maybe how many members you have here in Tampa Bay.
In Tampa Bay, we have in the Electric Vehicle Club over 200 members right now. We started in 2019, and it has been growing steadily with meetups and events of that type. The goal is to share our electric vehicle experience with people that might be interested in electric vehicles but are not familiar.
And then what was your experience with your EV during the storm? We had talked a little bit, you shared some experience about gas and charging, right?
Yeah, well, I haven't used gas for over a year now, or visited a gas station. I had to visit one to get gas for my generator because we were without power for over a week. But we also have an electric vehicle, a Tesla, and we were able to charge all our cell phones or lights, etc., from the car. When we had to recharge, we went to a charging station. We have several within 5-10 minutes, and that was not problematic. We didn't have to deal with lines, etc. We had a friend that was waiting for 4 hours in a gas station, and then the people started threatening each other, and it got murky. And when the tanker arrived with the gas, it was escorted by the National Guard and several police cars, which is scary.
Right. Yeah. So you were able to find places where you could charge pretty easily at a time when people were really waiting a long time for gas. I think that that's something to highlight, especially during a hurricane. I know that I saw lines that were hours and hours long. So being able to avoid that was really great. But let me ask you, what do you think would help people embrace EVs more in Florida?
Well, the biggest concern people have is range anxiety, which basically it refers to not being sure, being afraid of being stuck without power somewhere. That's an inaccurate perception. As you just said, there are many charging stations if you're on the road, and 90% of the EV drivers charge at home in the garage for normally. The other area where it would be important to help people adopt electric vehicles is making them affordable. We're in a situation where China has been investing in electric vehicles for over 10 years now, research and development, and our major auto manufacturers have not. And they're still backpedaling and pussyfooting over whether to jump in the pond or not. We're going to lose the train if they don't do it now. We already have electric vehicles coming from Vietnam that are half the price of the cheapest electric vehicle we can buy here. I'm talking about $14,000.
Okay, so it sounds like get more American-made vehicles on the road that are electric. That makes sense. Javier, I'm going to go ahead and move on just because we're a bit over time and I want to open it up to some questions afterwards. If we could throw those slides back up, Elliot. I want to briefly talk a little bit about energy and EV policy here in the state of Florida. Like I said, what we don't have in policy, we try to make up for in public engagement. But let's talk about what we do have in policy. So we do have, especially like when it comes to solar, we do have one-to-one net metering in place for now. Now that requires utilities to give solar owners a one-to-one rate credit for every kilowatt of energy that they send back to the grid, right? So they fill up their solar panels, they fill up what they need for their house, what they send back to the grid, they're supposed to get a one-to-one rate for that. Now back in 2022, the legislature voted to stop net metering, but Governor Ron DeSantis used his veto for that, and he kept that down. We expect this issue to come up again this year, as there is an Orlando utility that is trying to eliminate net metering. So if they succeed, we feel like other utilities will follow, so we're working really hard to keep that net metering in place. Solar equipment in Florida is exempt from sales tax, so you get a small break there from the state. And you heard about those energy efficiency funds that Jeanette was talking about. We are slated to receive $350 million in federal funds for that home energy rebate program in 2025, and that will help households cut electricity costs and get more efficient appliances in place, things like that, weatherization updates. Let's head to the next part of this slide, which might be some of the negative things. So Florida has banned offshore wind, the planning, the operations, the equipment, just as a whole, they've banned it. So we can't even really have a conversation about how offshore wind might help offset some of our energy and fossil fuel emissions out there. So that's not something that we're going to be talking about in the state of Florida anytime soon. Also, this past legislative session, we removed our 100% renewable energy goal from law, along with any mention of climate change. So those are some setbacks that we're dealing with, but still moving forward. Let's see what's next. What are some improvements we could make? Well, we could set a renewable portfolio standard. You saw that some of the other states on this call have that. That's an incentive designed to encourage solar adoption by requiring the utilities to source a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable sources. It'd be great if we had one of those. We could work on that. Let's continue to protect net metering for sure, and let's support Floridians who want to become more storm resilient through renewable energy. You know, incentivize solar adoption and battery storage and make it easier for local governments to include these as part of their ways to make their community buildings much more resilient in a storm. Next. So Florida is, I'm so sorry, this type is small. If it's small for you guys to read, it definitely should have been a bit bigger here. Florida is now requiring FDOT, when we talk about EV policy now, this is the Florida Department of Transportation, to study hydrogen fueling infrastructure and support hydrogen-powered vehicles, as opposed to expanding our existing infrastructure and support for electric vehicles that are already on our roads. Florida has preempted any regulations around electric vehicle charging stations to the state. So that means your local governments can't make any decisions about charging stations, where they're going to go, how many there maybe should be, things like that. And also, the Department of Transportation has received $105 million in federal funding called NEVI funds that they applied for to expand electrical vehicle charging and infrastructure. They received this money since 2022. It has not been deployed yet. You can't even apply for it yet. So we would love to see the release of those funds so that businesses could put charging stations at their places of business with very little cost to them. What's next? Here's a good thing. Is one great thing in Florida. So far, Florida doesn't have an EV license tax. So this is a tax that would require EV owners to pay a fee to the state to make up for the loss of revenue that the state is missing from the sales tax that comes with filling up your car. So right now, we don't have one of those, but I expect it will be coming soon. Next. Some policy improvements. We talked about releasing those NEVI funds so that we can put in some more charging stations. Listen, the free market is driving the increase of electric vehicles on Florida roads. It's certainly not the government. So we want to see state leaders accommodate them and the increase of EVs on our roads the same way they would accommodate any other vehicle that was on our roads. We want to see them support Floridians also who are looking to become more storm resilient, just like the solar power, and support EV sales and charging stations as a way to diversify our access to energy during extreme weather. And I think that is it. Great. I know that we are answering questions in our Q&A section, so maybe this is not, are we going to answer live questions here? I don't think that we are. I think
we're over time, although I will say, if anyone was wondering how to pronounce that town, it's Milledgeville.
Thank you.
So I think we are over time, but we'll be sharing resources and our contact information. So I'll just say thank you everyone for hanging with us through technical difficulties. Thank you to our speakers. We really, really appreciate you. Thank you to my fellow partners in the Southeast. This has been really fun to take this deep dive. Thanks all. Bye.